Hello, this will be your first in a series of short descriptions about how we explore spatial data using ArcPy. So the first thing here is this fun little graphic with our little Python sneak sitting in our Arc toolbox, viewing all of the data that would be sitting on disk that you can view within the Esri ArcGIS software packages, be ArcMap or ArcPro. So what we're going to be learning about here is how do we use ArcPy to get in and see this information without opening a Windows folder to see where your data is, or without opening up a GIS software package to be able to see graphically where our data is. So the tools that we're going to be using here is we're going to be looking at exists. So we're going to be checking to see if data or workspaces exist. We're then going to move on, and you'll notice the next series of short videos are going to be about creating lists of data that exist in workspaces, and then also describing that GIS data. So how do we replicate the function of effectively right-clicking on a data set and looking at all of its properties that tell us all of the interesting things about its coordinate system, its datum, what the units of the data are, whether or not it's a point, a line, a polygon, a shapefile, a geodatabase. So we'll learn later on how to do that. But the focus right now is going to be on checking to see if our data or workspaces exists. And this is with using the exists function within ArcPy. And you access it by first importing ArcPy into a script and then using arcpy.exists. And notice that there is an open parentheses and a closed parentheses after exists, meaning that you can put something in there. So we're going to learn about how we can use this in order to identify if individual data sets exist or if individual workspaces exist. So places where this is useful to use. So let's say you want to check if an input data set exists in a workspace that you think it might be, and this might be before you want to use it in a geoprocessing string. You want to make sure that your script is sitting in a location where the data set actually exists. Or sometimes you want to see if a data set that you're about to create already exists, or if another data set of that same name already exists. And you can do that. You can ask that question with exists as well. You can also look to see if workspaces or folders or a geodatabase exists before you start using it as an environment setting. So remember, we learned about environment settings, and one of those important ones is our workspace environment. So you might want to check to see if a workspace exists before you start using it as an option within one of your scripts. Now, what does arcpy.exists return? It returns a Boolean value. And remember, Boolean means it's going to evaluate out to be true or false. So it will return a value of true if a data or workspace exists, or a value of false if that data or workspace does not exist. So here are some best practices. So you always want to import ArcPy first. Remember that anytime you want to use anything out of the ArcPy module, you first have to import it in your script or in your idle session. Then the next thing usually that happens is you're going to set your workspace. If you're going to be doing GIS operations, you want to make sure you're sitting in the workspace where your data is living. In this example, notice that our workspace is a geodatabase. We know that by the .gdb being at the end. Remember, our geodatabase feature classes live in the .gdb, the geodatabase. If we were working with shapefiles, our workspace would just be a folder name. And then our dataset names would all have the .shp at the end. Notice here that we're setting the current workspace, and then we're using arcpy.exists in this code snippet to ask a question. Does a data set or feature class named road buffer exist within our data geodatabase? Notice it's set up as an if statement. Now, if that line, if arcpy.exists road buffer returns a true value, it will go on to the if statement. If it returns a false value, remember if, then, and else rely on true versus false. If it returns a false value, it will skip over what's inside of the if statement. So oftentimes the arcpy.exists is used with both data and workspaces to see if they exist, and sometimes if they do, you want to get rid of them so that your processes can run again. Imagine data has updated, or you're testing your script and you just need to create something again. You can manage that with the overwrite output, but remember, overwrite output would not impact your workspaces. You can't get rid of a workspace and overwrite that. So here is another way that we can test to see if a workspace would exist as well, and you could get rid of that geodatabase or that folder as well. In this example, however, it's just focused on data, so it's asking if it exists Then we're going to use the delete management. So this is one common practice that goes along with the exists method. So arcpy.delete management, and then you delete that data set. What that just does is if it exists, it's just going to delete it, and the rest of your script is going to go on and be able to proceed without any errors telling you that things already exist. All right, so that was arcpy.exists. So move forward and you'll get to your next mini lecture on your next exploring spatial data with arcpy.